And we begin this morning with Senate President Stuart Adams and Senate Minority Leader Karen Main. They are here to preview the upcoming session. So glad to have both of you here on the show. Thanks so much for making time to join us today.
Thank you.
To be with you,
Let's start off. Each session you go into and it kind of has its own little feel of what to expect. As we head into tomorrow, what is the overall feel of this session looking like for each one of you? President, let's start with you.
I think we've got very capable legislators. I think we're looking forward to a great session. And I think we've got a lot of issues we got to deal with, and part of it is tax reform. So we're going to probably look at that and decide what to do.
Yeah, and that kind of has taken on a whole new feel given the latest developments. We'll get more into that in just a little bit. Senator Main, as we go into the session, what is the overall feel of what we can expect to you?
I think what I feel is change. I think there's many pieces of legislation that have change involved with that. We have the tax reform bill that we passed, and the people have spoken. So we have to deal with that. I don't know if we're going to have two budgets. I don't know where we're going to go, but I know there's going to have to be legislation and conversation to deal with that.
Let's go ahead and get into that, because when you take a look at a referendum and you start to see the signature process gathering go, you think it's a long shot. But this one really came together, and it appears as of time of recording that it has great potential of making it on the ballot. So how does that change things now as we head into the session?
You know, it's great to be an American, isn't it? You see change happen all over the place, and the process we have, the Legislature Act, we've had a referendum, and I think, you know, we disagree with each other, but we hopefully aren't disagreeable. And some of my best friends are involved in the referendum process. We'll listen to them. That's part of the process, and we'll retool and come back and figure out another direction and try to find a great way to fix this structural imbalance that we have.
Senator Main, you were part of the referendum process.
Yes.
Talk about what you saw and to the point that it came to.
You know, I'm excited because I've seen so many different kinds of people come together. I've been to Harmon's and the other grocery stores, and there's an accountant, there was a social worker, and they were independent voters, they were Republicans, they were all over the chart, and they came together. And what I like is social involvement. This is an issue that bubbled up and that everybody wanted to be involved with, and I think that's really good for a community.
You made a point in your opening statement about this possibility of two budgets. How are we going to go forward? How do we go forward now that it appears this bill is going to have to go on hold and potentially getting to the ballot on November? You
know, we're going to start a session tomorrow. And as we do that, we're going to come together and we'll talk in our caucuses. We've got other opportunities for us to be able to talk to our staff, figure out what are the possibilities. But Utah has been the best state in the nation for economic development. We've got the lowest unemployment rate. We've got a great economics and a great economy in the state of Utah. That's not going to change, and we're going to be able to try to deal with this somehow.
Senator Main, what do you see happening?
I see what we need to happen is working together, because now we have a referendum and we have a bill that's passed. And like the President said, we've got to work together. We've got to have some kind of legislation or format going forward, because we have to, the will of the people, it's spoken. This is what they want. So we have to work together to make some kind of product at the end of the session.
Is it a possibility of maybe repealing the bill that was passed in the special session and just starting over and making some minor changes?
You know, I think everything's on the table again.
Okay. And
we're going to look at every option, and those options probably won't be totally determined until we've had time to evaluate it.
Is there a sense of urgency, though, to get something done? Like, one of the big problems that we've been dealing with is the dependent exemption. We had that problem with the 2018 federal reform. The state didn't make any changes with that, and so families were surprisingly hit hard from that. Can you see maybe addressing issues like that off the bat and trying to get that done with some urgency instead of waiting to see how the referendum might play out?
We actually addressed that right after it happened and gave a $535 exemption. We've actually trying to find the money to continue to do that. That's one of the things this bill did is gave that $2,500 exemption per dependent. So that'll be part of the discussion, has been for a long time, and I'm sure we'll have that discussion as we go into the session.
Any smaller type fixes you'd like to see take place immediately?
I have a piece of legislation that refers to the bill that was passed, and that is the tax off Social Security. I've always held that dear, and it's a piece of the tax reform bill. but I want to have there is a cap on that, and I have legislation now to raise that cap. I think it doesn't take care of a family with 2 wage earners, so that piece of legislation is coming forth from me.
Okay. We will continue to watch that. Obviously, I expect this will be a big part of the session over the next 45 days or so. What are some other top priorities, President, that you would like to see addressed during this session?
Well, always education funding. We're going to continue to try to fund education, and that's going to be a top priority. Workforce development, again, we have the strongest economy, I think, in the nation. We've got a real demand for workers. That's a very big deal. Infrastructure, with a growing population, you've got to take care of infrastructure. And then we'll deal with a couple of issues. We may look at the session date, see what we might be able to do there and see if there's a desire to change that around. And obviously vaping's been a big issue, and I think that'll be something we'll probably deal with in the session.
Senator Main, let's talk about education funding. That was another big issue with this tax reform bill as far as cutting the income tax, which is earmarked for education. Do you like what we saw from the governor and his budget proposal for education, or where do you see that going from here?
I've always been in favor of earmarks for education and transportation. I think those 2 cylinders should be protected because they used to steal from each other. So I believe in that, and so you know, I had a no vote on the tax reform bill, and now it's open to into general funds. I think going in, I need protection with legislation that protects those education funds. If we're going to do that, there needs to be roadblocks and direction for all those funds. We just can't let them go somewhere. And it's not my colleagues now. I'm concerned in years going forward, will they have the same vision for education as we do? So I think we need to have protections in place.
Over the last few years, certainly 5, 6 years, we have certainly, no doubt about it, seen a lot of new money going to education. But you kind of bring up the point that you're not concerned about the crew now, maybe down the road. Your thoughts on that, President?
Well, you're right. We've done a great job. I started with the $3 billion education budget a few years ago. We're up to almost $6 billion. We put TSSA money in. We've got school trust money. I think this year, $2.7 billion in the school trust fund. They'll actually deliver $100 million. We've actually allowed equalization, which allowed property taxes to freeze for a while, and more money coming in from even property tax. So we've made a great effort to fund education. As I mentioned, we're going to continue to do that. Our workforce and our kids are probably the most important thing we can try to take care of.
Do you share the same concern as Senator Main, though, whereas if you take away an earmark situation like we have with the income tax, that maybe down the road that could pose a problem for school funding?
You know, income tax is the most volatile tax we've got. It goes, I've seen it go from 18% increase to almost a 19% decrease. Stability, I think, in any funding source is, I think, the most important thing we can do. So I think we'll probably continue to have this discussion, but I'm not sure exactly what the earmark has done for education. When you look over the history of what we've done funding-wise, I think part of that is people's commitment to it, and right now we have a legislator that's very committed to fund education.
All right. Do you like what you saw from the governor's proposal on education?
I did, yes.
Okay. All right. We will watch that as well as that plays out. You brought up another interesting situation we've really been dealing with from a health standard, and that is the vaping situation. More specifically, where do you think we could go from there? We saw that a huge issue and focus in the nation's capital, kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit with other things that are going on there, but where do we need to move there?
One of the things we need to do is we need more enforcement. Some of the shops, you can actually game the system a little bit and sell a t-shirt and for $15 and sell a vaping pen for $1. Enforcement and regulation is something we need to look at. We've talked too about actually standing up maybe a drug task force and actually taking a couple $1 million and going after the cartels, because with vaping, a lot of people think it's tobacco, but it's tobacco and THC, about 50-50. And so when you raise the price of tobacco, you may not fix the problem when you have to deal with the fact that kids might be still using THC. So there's got to be funding for the programs in the school and actually some degree of enforcement.
Is that something your caucus is looking at as
You
well,
bet.
wanting to get
We're
through?
on the same page with this, and the President and I have had conversations about this. Is number one in the legislature. There's many pieces of legislation and concerns, we're on the same page. And we work together for that. We need to get a control of this. This is just damaging our youth and people that think this is an answer rather than smoking. It's just another problem.
You brought up one other thing about the date of the legislative session. I didn't quite catch where that was going. Be more specific on that.
Well, the date of the session is in the Constitution. So anytime we change the date of the session, we have to go back and change the Constitution. So there may be some talk this year about actually amending the Constitution so we have flexibility in that date. And we've had the Olympics here. We've had to move the date. It's a little cumbersome to have it, and maybe a little clunky to actually have it in the Constitution.
So to continue with a 45-day session, but maybe being a little more flexible with when that starts.
We surely don't want to go more than 45 days, so I don't think that'll be on the table.
Yeah, I don't think across the board anyone wants to see that, right?
That's right.
Hey, so great to have you on the show.
Thank you very
Looking
much.
forward to the session. I'll be seeing you guys probably daily, whether you like it or not. Thanks so much for being here.
Appreciate
to
your
be with
time.
you,
Thank you
Glenn.
so much.